Hey guys, it's Crystal here from Christico Design. Today we're working up the Piemonte blanket. I'll be using a 5.5mm crochet hook and number 4 medium worsted weight yarn. The blanket finished here is about 36 inches square, and I used 1149 yards of Caron Cakes in the shade White Truffle, 3 cakes. For this video, I'm using Red Hearts all-in-one granny square. This is a center out blanket, which means you can make it to any size. To begin, we'll start with a magic circle. Start with the magic circle. In the magic circle, I'm going to pull up a long loop, and then I'm going to make a puff stitch, another puff stitch, and a chain 1. To puff stitch, I'll yarn over, insert my hook in the stitch for the magic circle, yarn over and pull up a loop. I'll have 3 loops on my hook. Yarn over, insert my hook, yarn over and pull up a loop. Keep repeating that until I have 9 loops on my hook. Once I have 9, I'll yarn over and pull through all 9 loops. And then chain 1. This will create 2 stitches, one made from the puff stitch and one for the chain on top. We will count both of these stitches as part of our stitch count. So remember the chain 1 when making a puff stitch. Okay, our next stitch in the magic circle is another puff stitch. Okay, we'll do our chain 1 to close this one. And there we have our 2 puff stitch. Now we're going to do an additional chain. This is going to be one of our corners because we're making a little square here. So in order to denote this one, I'm going to go ahead and put a stitch marker in that second chain I've created so that I can easily identify it on the next round. Okay, and now we're going to repeat 3 more times. So we will do 2 puff stitches and an extra chain 1. Okay, I'm finishing my 3rd puff stitch here, so I'm going to take a moment to mark the extra chain 1 that is in between puff stitches. That will be a corner. So there's my corner. These 2 are the puff stitch and the chain 1 for that puff stitch. And now I'm going to make another puff stitch. Remember, each puff stitch is 9 loops. You can take a moment to spread them out across your hook and count them, and each puff stitch includes a chain 1. The extra ones here we're working are for the corners in between puff stitch sets. After every 2 puff stitches, taking an extra chain 1, that will be the corner, and taking a moment to mark it. So I'll end this round with 8 puff stitches, and if you count the stitches on top like I talked about, you will have 20 stitches at the end. Okay, so I still have a few more puff stitches and chain 1s to do. Next up is another puff stitch for my 6th one. Okay, after 2 puff stitches, I do a chain 1 for one of my corners. Okay, I'm on my last repeat of Puff Puff Chain 1. This is the second puff in that sequence. So I'll finish up here and do my final chain 1. And then now we are doing another chain 1 for the corner. And then because this is the last stitch on the first round, I'm going to do an additional chain 1 because of how I'm going to do the join. This is the only spot where I will do this. So now I'll mark the chain 1 that is for my corner. And then I'm going to join to the chain 1 from my first puff stitch. I'm going to skip the marked stitch, the long loop, and join to the top here. I'll use a slip stitch to join the round at the top of the first puff stitch. And so I have 4 corners where my chain 1s are, and 8 puff stitches, and a total of 20 stitches if you go around and count the tops of all of your stitches here, like so. And now we'll turn our work, and into this space here is where we're going to work our puff stitches. We'll pull up that long loop. We're going to place our first puff stitch in this chain space that we have created. Let me remove the stitch marker. For the remainder of the video, I'll be working at regular speed. Remember that you can slow it down by clicking on the cog settings button and choosing your playback speed. I'll mark that long loop that marks our first puff stitch here. All right, after the first puff stitch, we're now going to work double crochets, 1 in each of the next 3 stitches. You'll begin right next to your chain stitches there, and you're going to work 3. So you'll start in the top of 1 puff stitch, and you'll finish in the top of a puff stitch. So it's double crochet in a puff stitch, double crochet in a chain, double crochet in a puff stitch. Okay, that brings us to our next chain corner. And in the corner, we're going to place a puff stitch, an additional chain 1, and a second puff stitch, all in that same chain space to create our next corner. Let me just remove my stitch marker. Remember, you have a chain 1 to close your puff, and then for the corners, we're doing an additional chain 1, working my second puff stitch here. And I will continue to mark my chain 1s that are the corner stitches. And we will do 1 double crochet in the top of the next puff stitch. You might have to squish those corner stitches over. And then another double crochet in the next stitch, and a 3rd double crochet in the following. And it will be in the top of a puff stitch, a chain stitch, and a puff stitch. There we go. Brings us to our next corner chain space here. And now we repeat the sequence 2 more times for this side and the final side. Puff stitch, additional chain 1, puff stitch again, 3 double crochets in the next 3 stitches, and you repeat that. That's another puff stitch corner complete. Squish those over and then double crochet in the next 3 stitches. And here we are in our final corner. Puff stitch, additional chain 1, puff stitch, there we go. I will mark this corner. You can see how our square is working up nicely now. Squish these over, place my 3 double crochets in the last stitches around. And that brings us back to our first puff stitch. If you'll recall, we started the round only with 1 puff stitch. So now we're going to finish up by placing 1 more puff stitch in that same chain space as the one we started with in order to have the 2 puff stitches together in this first corner. We are hiding our join here in our puff stitch corner, so that is one reason we're doing it this way. So we're going to make our puff stitch in the same spot as the first one. And we're finishing that puff stitch, do our chain 1 to finish, and then we're doing an additional chain 1 for our corner chain space between our first and last puff stitch of the round. That was my first stitch there with the green stitch marker. And now I'm going to join to that, which is different than I did the first round. This is how I will join every round now. We're going to hide that seam in our puff stitch corners so you really won't notice it. Round 2 ends with 32 stitches. On to round 3. Remember to turn your work before you get started here. We'll pull up our long loop and we're going to place a puff stitch in that first chain space of the round. All right, I'm marking my first puff stitch of the round. This is where I will join when I get to the end. And now I'm going to double crochet across this row, or this side. We'll start in the puff stitch and we'll end in the puff stitch. So it will be 6 double crochets for round 3 between this corner and the next. And when I get to my next corner, I can start my repeat that I will follow all the way around. I'll place a puff stitch, an additional chain 1, and a second puff stitch in this corner. And then I will double crochet in the next 6 stitches, starting in top of the puff stitch and ending in the first puff stitch of the following corner. There's my puff stitch corner. You can see them stacked nicely here. I'm going to mark my center chain 1 there. And now I have to squish over to make sure I can work into the top of that puff stitch for my first double crochet of the row. And then I will work 6 straight across here before I start on my following corner. Okay, and now we've made it to the next corner, so we will do a puff stitch, additional chain one, and a second puff stitch, all in that same corner. And I'll mark my corner stitch, and I'm going to work 6 double crochets along this side. And that brings us to another corner where we will place our puff stitch, additional chain one, and second puff stitch, all in that corner. Okay, now I'll mark that corner. And it's time to work 6 double crochets across our last side here, which will bring us back to our starting puff stitch. Okay, so now in the same chain space as the first puff stitch, we're going to place another puff stitch and an additional chain one, and then slip stitch to the long loop of the first puff stitch to join the round and turn our work. We'll end this round 3 with 44 stitches. On to round 4, pull up a long loop, place a puff stitch in the first chain space, and now we will double crochet across, starting in the top of this puff stitch and ending in the top of the first puff stitch in the next corner. This will give us 9 double crochets along each side for this round. Okay, that brings us to our next corner. I'll remove my stitch marker, and in the corner we're going to place puff stitch, chain one, puff stitch. And mark that corner with my stitch marker. Okay, and now we have 9 double crochets to work across this side. And that brings us to our next corner. I'll remove my stitch marker, and in this corner I'm going to place puff stitch, chain 1, puff stitch. And I'll mark that corner too. And we're working double crochets across this side. You'll have 9 between your puff stitch corners. And that brings me to my next corner. I'll remove my stitch marker and work my puff stitch, chain 1, and puff stitch. And that brings us to our final side, where we will place 9 double crochets across. Take a second to mark my corner. And here we are back to our first puff stitch corner. We're going to place our last puff stitch of this round in the same space as the first puff stitch. Remember to do your additional chain 1, and then we're going to join to the long loop we pull up the first stitch of the round. We'll end round 4 with 56 stitches. So each round will increase by 12 stitches, which you can see in the double crochet stitch count by each side going up 3. Okay, make sure you turn your work. For round 5, this is going to be the last round I work on camera for you, because now we are just repeating. Pull up a long loop, place a puff stitch in the first chain space, mark that first stitch, double crochet in top of the next puff stitch and in each stitch across until the next corner stitch. That last double crochet will be in the top of the first puff stitch of each corner. So if we had 9 double crochets last round, we're going to have 12 between puff stitch corners this round, 15 on the next, 18 on the following, etc. And as I just worked my last double crochet in top of puff stitch, that helps me know I have reached a corner where I will place a puff stitch, additional chain 1, and a second puff stitch all in the corner. You can continue marking your corners throughout the pattern, or once you are familiar with it, you can stop doing that. I find it helps me to slow down a little bit and make sure I don't forget that additional chain 1. Turning the corner here and working the double crochets across this side. Okay, and in this corner I'll take out my stitch marker and add my puff stitch, chain 1 puff stitch. And then we'll double crochet across this side. And we're at the next corner there. So I'll remove my stitch marker and add my corner puff, chain 1 puff. And now we're ready to double crochet across this row. Okay, and here we are back to the first stitch of the row, which is our puff stitch. We will add our last puff stitch of this round in the same space as the first puff stitch, and make sure to do our chain 1 and then join to the long loop we pull up to join the round and turn our work. Okay, and now you just keep repeating. I went through 32 rounds with the Caron Cakes that I used. You can keep repeating as long as you like to make your square as big as you like. And then I'm going to show you the border that you can finish off with if you like. Okay, so I turned my work for the border. I'll start with a chain 1 that doesn't count as a stitch. And in this same spot here, I'm going to place both a single crochet and a half double crochet. Then I'll skip the next stitch, and in the following I will place again a single crochet and a half double crochet, and then skip the following stitch, and then that's my repeat around. Single crochet, half double crochet in the same stitch, skip the next, and it should work nicely all the way around if you have an even stitch count. If you need to skip an extra stitch, like as you get close to a corner or something, you can do that. In each corner, you'll place double the amount of stitches. So we'll do 2 sets of single crochet, half double crochet. So I'm skipping here. I got to my first corner now. I will skip that stitch, and in the corner chain space, I'll place a single crochet, half double crochet, and then another single crochet, and half double crochet. And then just continue around the other side, skip one, place both single crochet and half double crochet in each stitch, and keep working and repeating that all the way around. Okay, and here at the end, we are ready to skip the next stitch, which is a puff stitch, and in that chain space that's between the first and last puff stitches, we're going to work one more set of single crochet and half double crochet, and then you can slip stitch to the top of your first single crochet of the round to finish it off, and that will end your border row. Just cut your yarn and weave away your ends.